Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm here at the Toronto Zoo in the Fish Lab, where our mission is to connect people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. And currently what you're looking at are some of our young salmon as part of our Aqualinks program. And I've just turned the light on to give you a little glimpse of them. And we get these eggs that are eyed, so you can literally see the eyes in them. And when they hatch, the salmon fall to the bottom. They will hide amongst the gravel, and they're basically a very jelly belly with a stick tail, and they don't do much until they start to absorb that yolk sac and grow into what you see before you. And right now they're swimming against the current a little bit. They don't want to expend a lot of energy. They want to put the resources into growth. And I find this Atlantic salmon program to be very representative of our mission here at the Toronto Zoo. And that is, these salmon typically, outside of COVID right now, would be set up in a classroom. And we have 25 classrooms that participate in this program. And the kids get to raise these salmon to the point that we're set to release them in May. And they actually get to go out in the field. So we're actually connecting them with the animals and the habitat, and then they get to release them. And these salmon have gone extinct over the last 100 years in our natural waters and Lake Ontario. So our hope is to get a population reintroduced, and they'll spend about 4 years in the streams growing and eating before they migrate down to Lake Ontario, where they'll stay in the fresh water. In about 8 to 10 years, then they will migrate upstream. They're pretty voracious. Like I said, we just turned the light on for them just to let you have a peek at them. You see their mottled pattern on it, which is great camouflage amongst the substrate. And I really like this program. Let's move on to see some other stuff here in the Fish Lab. We have 4 rooms that are for quarantine, for holding, conservation programs, and any research that we want to do. And right now we just happen to be in one of the conservation rooms. I've turned off some of the pumps and things so that you can hear everything. And before we hit our next specimens, actually I need to grab some food for them. I want to tell you that Mother Nature has a great sense of humor. And the species that you're going to see next is very iconic. You'll easily recognize it. And this is one in which the males are pregnant. I'm going to grab food. So what you're looking at are our potbelly seahorses. These are some young males, and the way you can tell that they're males, they have this pouch, and they will balloon this pouch up, and if we look at some of these specimens, they don't quite have them up, but they'll look like they've swallowed a golf ball. And what they do is they jiggle that belly to entice the female. It's part of the courtship in which they show that they can hold all the eggs that she can produce. And they'll inflate it full of water, and then during the courtship they will take the eggs from the female, they're fertilized in the pouch, and they'll raise them. Now these are salt water, they're not fresh water, and the water is chilled for these guys. They're down around 15 to 18 degrees, and you can see the feeding habits of them. Believe it or not, these guys are predators. And you see how quickly they'll move that jaw. It actually creates a little clicking noise that would stun little, just long enough for them to inhale them in their tube-shaped snout. And very much like chameleons, their eyes work independent, and they do see us and they do react to us. So we have some larger males just next to you in the next tank, and they're watching and they're waiting for a little snack also. And I'm feeding them a frozen shrimp. Then you can also go, we have 2 more tanks down below in which we have some females, and we keep the sexes separate just so they're not breeding all the time. We can only accommodate so many seahorses, and the females by separating them, the females then aren't investing all kinds of energy into egg production, because they'll produce anywhere between 100 to 300 eggs at a time, and that's a lot of energy and demand on their bodies. And we like to have them live a little longer than they would in the wild, in which we can sustain a breeding population. And what do we do with our seahorses? Our seahorses end up going to other zoos and aquariums, in which are set up in displays in an attempt to educate you, so that when you're on trips, that you're not buying trinkets of dried seahorses or ornaments. And they do require a fair amount of care and resources to look after them. And they are severely overfished in the wild. So hopefully times will change and we'll get people to accommodate. Actually, I'm going to stop talking for a second. You can hear the females clicking. It'll sound like a little tiny tick on the glass, and that's it's almost like a supersonic sound that just stuns the prey just a little bit. So the males will hold the eggs. They fertilize them in the pouch, as I said, for about 30 days. And then the males will actually open their pouch and they'll propel the young out. So they literally just eject them out. There's no choice. When they come out, they're about 3/4 of an inch long, mostly tail. And we feed them baby brine shrimp, which is sea monkeys, if you remember. You used to see those in the comics ages ago. And they will eat those until they grow up, and we keep graduating them up on different size food. Now, how do seahorses move around? Well, on their back, you'll see a fin in which propels them forward and backwards, their caudal fin. And then up on their head, each side of their gill cover, they have a little fin, which is their pectoral fins, that steer them from left and right. And you'll notice seahorses have a prehensile tail. Sorry. Now, we've been breeding seahorses probably a good 15 years, and we've had a couple of different species. This is one of my favorite. I think they make a great ambassador for seahorses.
How many types of seahorses are there?
Oh, I honestly couldn't tell you. There are probably several hundreds. I know that they're constantly discovering. There are some that mimic corals and plants in the environment, so they're still being discovered. But these are ones that are heavily trafficked.
How does the seahorse get the eggs in his stomach?
So the male will open his pouch, and they literally go belly to belly. And if you look in his pouch, you'll see a little opening at the very front, and he'll open that up. The female will then take, and she has a little tiny tube that comes out, an ovipositor, in which she positions herself so that the ovipositor goes in the pouch, and she literally contracts her abdomen, and they sort of start squirting in. They twine tails together, and they literally swim from the bottom of the tank up to the top, doing this courtship dance.
So that was another question. Their tails, were they just used for hanging on to things? So what else does their tail get used for? I guess to hang on to each other.
Exactly. So they will face a lot of current, and if they want to not expand any energy, they will use it to hold on to coral or plant material, but they do use it in courtship also. And if something grabs a hold of them, they will actually use that tail to flick it off of them. So often, if we have to handle them for any reason, they will use that tail to try to get our fingers off of them.
Do their tails get entangled with other seahorses sometimes? Somebody asked.
Certainly. Right here, you'll see that they're hanging on, and sometimes they're very indiscriminate in what they grab. They'll grab another seahorse's snout or around their neck and hang on. And that's why we put what we call hitching posts inside the tanks, which are different furniture for them to grab onto.
And why are they overfished, somebody asked?
They're used in cultural practices, and they're also used in the pet trade. And one of the worst things you can do, unless you are well set up to look after seahorses, is don't try and rescue them in a pet store, even if they look sick or anything. The best thing is to not support that kind of avenue, but there are, and always look for captive bred seahorses. There are plenty of people that keep them, but we just prefer to educate people not to buy the trinkets of shellacked seahorses or dried seahorses. I think they're too cute to do that.
Why do the seahorses have dots on their skin? A 6-year-old would like to know.
Well, the dots are part of their attempt to camouflage themselves in the environment. But they can also make their coloration go very light in color and very dark. So almost like a chameleon, but they have very limited abilities. And also when they're feeling very robust and trying to attract a female, they can make them that much brighter when they inflate that pouch. And the females, they don't have the same kind of markings. They do have some banding on the back of them. And that would be for any fish that are above, looking down at them, they would blend into the surface. And that's what a lot of their coloration does, because they are lower in the water column.
How long do the babies stay in the pouch?
About 30 days, and that's dependent on water temperature. So the warmer the water is, the less time, and the colder it is, a little bit longer.
Do these guys have names?
They don't have names. Too many of them to name. I can't tell them apart. Can you? And you can see these fish in Australasia, in the Great Barrier Reef. And we have some keepers over there that do a great job with them and are very passionate. Okay, next we'll move on to another program that we have going on, and that would be our Madagascar fish. We've been involved in Madagascar fish since 2004, and we've actually funded a keeper to go do some work in the field in 2010 and 2014, in which he brought back 5 species of fish. And we don't just go there and go fishing on our own. We build connections with the local Malagasy people who are great fishermen, know the habitat, and we work with them to support them. So we brought a few specimens back in which we can work on their biology and some of their needs to reproduce them and educate people on this program and hopefully gain more support that could go to the field. And the fish you're actually looking at now are Insalitas, and they have been bred here. These are actually the offspring that have been growing up. And the way that we support the conservation programs is we are securing some genetic material here under human care, but we're also supporting the Malagasy people by building ponds in which they can culture the fish, and we have an arrangement in which a portion gets released back into the wild, and they get to keep a portion for protein source to eat. And I think that's a win-win for everybody. Madagascar is facing some real threats in which there's habitat destruction, and a lot of erosion is adversely affecting the water quality that these fish need to live in. And it's due to the growing of rice paddies in which they divert the streams, so less water is flowing through the streams. It becomes shallower, warmer, lower oxygen, and these guys like cooler, cooler, higher oxygen water. Let's give them a little bit. And these guys are a cichlid. So what they do is they're very much like our own perch. They are substrate spawners, and they'll defend a little territory, and the male and female do a courtship, and they will defend it against all these other fish in the tank, and that's enriching for them because that's exactly what they would do in the wild. And they will fan and look after the eggs until they actually hatch into little fry, and then they'll protect them and let them grow up. And again, these fish have gone to other institutions,
What did you just feed them? Somebody
I
else.
gave them some of the same mysis shrimp that I give the seahorses. So they are insectivores. They'll eat phytoplankton, which is shrimp and organisms in the water. They don't care for a lot of protein. It's a very harsh life in the streams in Madagascar. So we have to be careful how much we give them. We want to simulate their diet. We can move on to another species. This one is severely threatened in the wild, and this is a little rainbow fish called marigige, and it's very hard to find in the wild anymore, so we have some efforts that we're trying to breed them, and I think that's awesome.
Some people are asking why there's no substrate in the bottom of the tanks.
So some tanks we do put substrate in, some we don't. It allows us to monitor their food consumption. This particular species, they don't really care whether there is substrate or not because they're more of a mid-water species. And what these guys will do is they'll actually line up beside one another, a male and a female, and they do a little sway with their body, and they propel their eggs and sperm into the plant material where they're fertilized, and they hide, and that protects it against predators. But this allows us to monitor the fish, make sure they're eating everything, and there are some other species that are very big substrate spawners that when they're mature, and we'll get to them, they want to dig pits in their own territory and move furniture around. They're very particular. And what you can't appreciate right now is the beautiful colors of these fish. We don't keep a lot of light over them because they can develop light-induced cataracts, and that's something we don't want to have. These are from streams in which there's low light because of tree cover over top, cooler water, and we try to stimulate that here for their health. This is another species. This is a Rhea. That's the species name. They are another one that we've been successful in breeding, which was a great thrill to see. Again, the fry are so tiny, and they play a role in the ecosystem in which they eat insects that fall into the water, an insect larva, and they breed about the same way in which they'll line up to a plant. But these are youngsters that we've been raising up, and they're a little on the shy side. Don't have a lot of people come into the fish lab, but it is part of the hidden zoo, and hopefully it'll become part of our wildlife encounters. Then we have another species here. These Paratrochilus loiselli are named after a former curator of the New York Aquarium, who's a huge supporter of the Madagascar conservation program. We have not been able to breed this species. They're truly pugnacious, which means aggressive and territorial. And because they get along, we're assuming it's a pair, but we just haven't found whatever the triggers are for them. And right now, because there's two of us, they're being a little bit shy. Usually they're right out front looking at you.
We have a lot of people asking what your job is here and what your skills are.
Okay, so my job right now is I'm a wildlife care supervisor. I spend about half of my career in this room, which is part of the Animal Health Center, and I was a curatorial keeper of fish for 14 years. My degree is in marine biology. I have been a fish hobbyist since I was 7 years old. I'm very passionate about it because I think it's hard to compete with the megahertz and the fuzzy animals here at the zoo, and I love the fish. Not only do we look after the fish, we look after this whole artificial environment for them, so you're maintaining that. And I get to train staff who then do an awesome job looking after the animals. So right now, during this time, I come and I help look after fish here, but I'm currently overseeing the rainforest, so I'll go up and help the staff up there, or I'll help my former area, which is the domain.
Are all these last few tanks that we saw from Madagascar, somebody asked?
They are. These are about 4 of the species. We have another species that's on display in the rainforest, and we do have some of these on display. We're working to get some, more of them on display and talk about that program, because I think it's important for people to know that just diverting water flow and affecting our natural bodies of water and environment is wiping out species that we might not see and do play a role and are important for people who live within the wild spaces. And I think that's about it for this room. I don't know if there's any more questions that you have. I just wanted to give you a little glimpse of the water world that I've lived in for quite a few years.
Why don't we end with, what's the biggest fish we have?
The biggest fish. Right now, that would be likely our jumbo gouramis in Indo-Malaya by weight and by size. But if you're looking at length, then maybe the bamboo shark in the Great Barrier Reef.
Cool.
Well, I hope that you check out all the rest of the Facebook Lives that we have coming up daily here. And I hope you stay safe. And I want to thank all the first responders and frontline workers for the great work that they're doing.